Alright, y'all. So I'm going to start by showing you every single photo that I'm going to feature in this video. We had a ton of submissions that were sent in by a bunch of really talented photographers, but unfortunately, we weren't able to put all of them in the video. But I'm going to run through and show you a quick before and after of each one. And I'll put in the timestamp somewhere in this area where you can skip to in the video, skip ahead to the time that you see here. If you want to see how to edit that specific photo, whether it's based on your editing style or your shooting style, if you're more light and airy, or if you tend to gravitate toward more black and white images, you can kind of see what editing style you resonate more with. And yeah, I'll post that there. I'm also using a huge, well, it's not that huge, but quite a lot of presets. I'm using the G Presets Collaboration Pack, Pack 3, and a bunch of Archipelago presets as well. And so I'm going to give you my unbiased opinion on what works best and why. I'm going to also point out why some presets were not designed with melanated folks in mind, and I'll show you what I mean. Don't get scared by this history panel here. I did a lot of playing around beforehand. None of these photos are mine, with the exception of this one that's coming up. This one here is a good example of a light and airy editing or shooting style. This is the only photo that's ours, and I'm only using it because there is a lot of skin showing here for this lovely lady. It's not the best or most interesting photo based on the composition, but I did want to show you just the highlights, the undertones that pop through here in her arm. And yeah, so it's a pretty good example of that. Here is this incredible portrait, this beautiful senior citizen here. So I made sure to include photos from all kinds of people with different shooting styles, different gear. This one here is a JPEG. You can see that right there. This one is a JPEG. I prefer shooting in RAW just because it retains a whole lot more detail, and it's easier to control the levels in your panels over here. But yeah, I'm going to dive in and get started with the first one. So for this lovely human, I'm going to use preset 3 from G3. So first thing I'm going to do is come in to the import. So this is what it looks like straight out of camera. I'm going to go over here and remove the chromatic aberration and enable the lens corrections. So what that does, it takes care of the vignette, that darkness and distortion that tends to come up with the lens. It'll tell you what lens it was shot with here. So yeah, so we're enabling the lens corrections. I'm going to come in and just notice when I hover over these presets how some of them super saturate the skin, over enhance the person, and they were designed like these would look they would probably look better on a person who had a lighter complexion, just being real. And so for me, this preset here, even though it does give a bit of saturation here in her skin, too much orange, I'm going to show you how to counteract that. So my holy trinity, the holy grail of skin tones for me is temperature, exposure, and saturation. Typically the orange saturation. Sometimes luminance, and I'll show you how adjusting this can recover some details that sometimes tend to get blown out. So first thing I'm going to do is darken up the photo just a touch. This is for my darker, moodier photogs out there. I'm going to lift up. Look how crazy it looks. Just bear with me. I'm going to lift up the warmth here, and I'm judging the overall feel of the photo based on the background over here. So I like where it's at. However, we need to come in and work on the complexion here. So first things first, we're going to lighten the saturation, or lessen the saturation, I guess I should say. I'm going to come in, and you kind of have to find that happy place. So this one is a bit desaturated, but it's looking a lot better in terms of how true to life her tone is here. I'm gonna bump up the luminance just a touch. I'm gonna come in here and since there is a lot of darkness that her cheek picks up based on the contrast, and then we lose a lot of detail here in the hair as well, I'm going to tone down this contrast, from 36 down to like maybe a 10. So already you can see it looks so much better. And yeah, so next thing I'm going to do is come in and start working on a few spot corrections that are absolutely not necessary, but just because of the way that I work with my clients, I always do like complimentary blemish, nothing overboard. She doesn't need any of what I'm doing. She looks absolutely precious. But just because if it were me, I know what I would want my photographer to do just to kind of soften the skin a little bit, nothing crazy. I'm not going to remove any like permanent scarring or anything unless they specifically told me to or paid me to do so. Now, in here in the T-zone, for all people, regardless of color, age, it tends to be a bit more problematic only because of the pores. And so the contrast will affect that and enhance the pores a bit too much. So what I'm going to do to counteract that is hit the texture tool. I'm going to tone down the contrast a bit. And then if it ends up being too blurry, let me give you an example. This here would be too blurry, obviously. So we're going to come back over here and remove that. Okay, so I think a 20, 28, 26 would be fine. And then again, if it's too blurry, then you can always go back in and either erase it or just slide it in the other direction. So I'm going to come in here where her pores are just to soften them up a little bit. We're not going to create an unrealistic version of the human that we're that you shot or that you're editing. That's not what we want. We don't want anything too far from reality, because that's not the point. It's just to soften the landscape of her skin, make it look soft, and let me see, coming over here, I'm going to bring it down and touch around the corners of her mouth just to smooth it out just a touch. I'm probably going to bump this up a little bit so it's not too blurry and too unrealistic. I'm going to come up here just a bit. And I'm also going to add one more layer of this texture to her lips, just a little bit. Just like that. Again, this is all a personal preference based on what your client asks you to do, or maybe they tell you don't do anything to my face. Cool, it just depends, but this is just for the sake of the video. I'm also going to blend in the eyeshadow just a little bit, just to soften the crinkles on her eyelid, just to give an overall smoother look to her skin. I think this looks absolutely beautiful. For quick reference, let's do a before and after. And yeah, so if you wanted to Now for this next image, we have this lovely pregnant human, and we're going to go in and again start from scratch. I'm going to show you based on the fiddling that I did beforehand. I'm going to show you which preset I thought worked best for this one, and it was the Nomad 6 from Archipelago Presets. And this is a quick before and after. So notice the greens, notice the tones of her skin. So let's start here. Import, this is straight out of camera. And first thing I'm going to do is enable the corrections here. And again, as I hover over these presets, notice how these do not work for her skin. They oversaturate too much. Look at this. This is not a bop for this lovely woman, only because her skin is so rich in color. These presets here way over saturate and bump up the contrast too high. So these might be okay. It just, again, it does a lot of washing out. Let's go up to the Nomad 6 for this one. All right. So right off the bat, for me, my personal taste, I'm not crazy about greens too much. This is totally your preference, but I'm going to tone these down and darken them up with this Luminance here. Maybe not so much just here. And I'm also going to hit the aqua slider. And yeah, so I'm pretty happy with these deep forest greens. And we'll go, I think the shadows here on her body look beautiful. I'm going to come in and touch up on the pores on her skin. I'm going to zoom it in a little bit more. She's absolutely gorgeous. Again, the contrast and the shadow settings on any preset are going to affect skin texture, such as pores, fine lines, and anything. And we're not saying anything against, you know, wrinkles or anything like that. That's not the point here. The point is just to soften up the landscape here, as we saw in the other photo, just to get it nice and smooth. So that way the pores aren't the focal point of the face here, if that makes sense. It's just to soften everything up, so that we can focus on her beautiful eyes, her warm complexion and everything, and all of that. So it's not creating anything too unrealistic. She still looks like herself. You can still see the pores, just, you know, they're not the focal point. So let's smooth out under the eyes a little bit, come back down here. So you see, you can still see the pores and everything. It's just overall a softer feel to them. I'm going to come down on her chin a little bit more, and that looks perfect to me. One thing I am going to show you is this redness here on her nose. You can easily counteract by using a temperature tool. Bump it up. I think 16 would be fine. If you went too far, obviously would not get the same effect, but look how smooth it, you know, it helps the transition immediately from this bridge of her nose here down to the tip. So it immediately soothes that out a bit. It's not perfect, but it you know, it kind of helps the gradient. If you went too far, hello, too far down, hello. So I think 15 is fine. That's fine. We had it at 16, but this works. And done. So the next thing I'm going to do is come down to her chest and smooth out the texture again, just a little bit. We're not going to do any spot correcting unless they hired you to do so. But for me, all of this is beautiful. It's part of her history, part of her skin, part of her, you know, her identity. So we're just going to soften up the pores here on the boobies just a little bit. Come in over here just to kind of soften out the landscape a little bit. So gorgeous. I love the maternal, Mother Earthy vibes we have in this photo. Again, on the tummy, just to soften up the hair a little bit. And I'm not going to delete this. I don't know what you call this line, but it's a trademark. It's a staple of motherhood. So we're going to leave that there. Last thing I'm going to do is work in the bikini area just a little bit. Nothing crazy. Still looks like herself. And here's a quick before and after. I'm obsessed. To me, this is perfect. So yeah, now moving on to this one. This is the before and after, and I went with a black and white for this one. It would have looked great with a color preset. However, I do want to show you some pointers to look out for whenever you're using black and whites on melanated skin, only because all black and white presets are not created equally. So I'm going to show you the straight out of camera image right here. And we went with the Wayfarer 8 preset from Archipelago. So first things first, let's do this here. Enable the profile corrections. Now, I'm going to show you once again how some presets, this one's pretty nice. This one's pretty good. It does add a little bit of heavier contrast on her skin. This one blows out her features a bit too much. We lose a bit of detail. You can always tweak it, but for me, this one was perfect right off the first click. So one of the things that I love to do on every single image that I personally post, or that Devonte edits, we just love grain, and a lot of it. This is our personal preference. Definitely not necessary for you to take the step, but it's just something. It's just a staple of our art. We're suckers for the nostalgic feel, and I think this level of grain here is like to die for. I am drooling over this. I love that the sparkles on her chest don't really distract from the overall beauty and from the focal point, which is her face. And speaking of which, I'm going to come in for a tighter crop here. If you are not familiar with the rule of thirds, I suggest you look into it. It's not like a deal breaker or anything, but I generally, for portraits like this, I want their eyes to fall on this line right here, and within this frame here, if that makes sense. So just something to look out for. So I'm going to leave her eyes right here. I'm going to remove this line from the bottom left corner, but I do love this little light leak over here, so I'm going to leave it at that. And this is like, I'm drooling, so this is perfect. There is not much else to do on the photo. All I'm going to do is come in and work the spot healing tool just a tiny bit. Damn, just stunning. So one thing you can do if you wanted to bring back some of the, if you wanted to darken the photo a little bit without over contrasting, that's not even a word, but without adding too much darkness to this side of her face, what you could do instead of dropping the exposure, which would end up, you see how it darkens her over here? What you can do, what I would suggest is going into the highlights first and dropping down the highlights over here a little bit. So it's your personal preference. You could come down over here. It's up to you. But if it were me, I would come down on the highlights first if you wanted to darken the photo a little bit. That way we don't overdo the darkness that is on the shadows over here. You know what I'm saying? So clearly the light is coming from this side of the setting. So of course it's going to leave a shadow on this side. But yeah, if you wanted to tone down a little bit, just be mindful not to overdo the darkness. Here's a before and after. So the shade and like overall, I guess, richness of her melanin is not affected. It is not compromised. It looks true to life. She doesn't look whitewashed. She does not look overly darkened or saturated or anything. So I think this here is perfect for this one. And now we're going to move into this beautiful lady. And here's a quick before and after. So the lighting situation is a bit tricky here because she is in direct sunlight, and you can kind of see that there are some shadows in her jaw, lower cheek area that kind of pick up some of that, some of the shadow. And we're going to go with the Nomad 6 for this one. I love the copper, I guess, kind of vintage retro feel to this preset, and I will, we're still going to need to do some tweaking. But anyway, let's begin. This is it straight out of camera. I'm going to enable my lens corrections here, and we're going to go in right away. Notice how the presets affect her skin. If she was lighter, they may not look, she may not have looked this orange or this overly saturated. So these presets probably are not the best fit for her. This is completely unrealistic. See, A and B, A and B. All right. So anyway, we're going up to Nomad 6 for this one. And it's a bit too light for my taste. The overall photo, and she also does look a little bit brighter than she should be. than her natural skin complexion. So we're going to tone down, we're going to tone down the exposure. And I'm going to come down here to the saturation and start working on it a little bit. I want to show you how the luminance affects the detail. So see, if you slide it over here, that's what happens. If you come too low, this is what happens. So just something to look out for. I'm going to restore it to where it was before. We were here. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to warm up the photo, and I'm probably going to darken it up again. I'm going to warm up the photo with the profile, warm this up, tone this down just a touch. So I am loving where the background is right now. And we do see that we have to lift some of the shadows off of her chin. It's not that we're lifting complexion color or melanin, nothing like that. What we're doing is just lifting the shadows. And it's going to be useful to use. Look at me, so bright. It's going to be helpful to use an isolated brush for this. So I'm going to tone down the contrast here a bit. And I'm going to come in and just lift right off the bat. Just lift some of that dark, muddy contrast that comes with the preset. Again, no preset is perfect, no matter how expensive or how fancy it is. It's not going to be a one-click solution for anyone. And there you go. Just a little bit more over here. And there we go. Let me see. I'm pretty happy with this over here. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is go in and this is your choice, but I am extra as fuck. Damn, I know. Perfection. And I am pretty happy with the way it looks here. Any extra steps would be entirely your decision, such as adding some grain. I'm going to intensify the grain a little bit. Again, it's my personal preference. I love grain. It's something that me and Devontae had in common from the beginning. We just love grainy photos. But that's your choice entirely. So yeah, she is absolutely killing it. She looks stunning, and I'm pretty happy with the complexion overall. Her face, it matches the rest of her skin, and the highlights are catching the sun the way they naturally would. So before and after, and yeah. This one here it's just absolutely stunning, jaw-dropping. So right off the bat, I'm going to go in for some lens corrections. That's the first thing I like to do. And then I did my research prior to this, and I saw see this preset here does not work. Again, we do have to expose, the photo is underexposed, so we are going to have to lift some of the exposure. But in doing so, I'll just give you an example. It's still too much contrast. It's too much tweaking for my taste. So I'm going to come down here, back to where we were, and add the Nomad 6 and kind of lift from there. It does a great job at complementing the warmth of the skin. The next thing I'm going to do is tighten up the crop. Again, bring that line here to eye level. And some people say that you shouldn't crop out limbs, and I personally don't give a shit. If the photo is this stunning and this radiant, I want her face, her afro, and just her features here to be the focal point, because she's that gorgeous, and I just think the photo, I don't know, portraits seem to be more powerful to me when they're a little bit closer up. So, all right. This here on her chest and her hand right here where you can see, that is kind of like your guide to seeing what her overall complexion is. So she is a little bit darker in her face here because of the shadow. This is the before and after. Clearly the place where where the photo was taken, the lighting was, I think it was like an overcast day. So we're going to lift some of the shadows off of her skin. But first, we're going to come in with that texture brush and just smooth out the gradient a little bit that the shadow caused. Just right here, really soft. Her skin is dewy and healthy and glowing, and all we're going to do is just enhance that. Enhance that glow, that radiance. Very soft, very subtle. I'm going to come in with my spot brush and just dab away right here just a tiny bit. Nothing major. Beautiful. Then one more thing I'm going to, draw your attention to is her eyes. I'm going to bump the saturation down, and there is no one specific setting for each person, but generally speaking, you'd have to kind of guesstimate it yourself. So see how her eye has a bit of like a yellow discoloration here. So I'm going to come in and counteract that. I'm going to lift up the exposure just a touch, and you kind of have to play around with it and see what looks natural. Even though I added a bit of a pink tint, that's just to kind of counteract the cooler tones here, just to keep it balanced. I think that looks fine. It's up to you. You kind of have to use your best judgment. I could go in a little bit more on this side. And yeah, it's really your call. Remove some of that contrast. I think it looks pretty good. Nothing major. It's just something to look out for. And overall, we're not going to get too picky, but overall that has enhanced the power in her eyes already. And then we're going to come over here and lift some of those shadows, bump down the contrast, remove the contrast. I think somewhere along here would be good. And again, if you start noticing that you're going a bit too light, then you can always go in and adjust your slider. So I'm going to come in here in her neck region. I'm going to leave her highlights alone right here in this part. I'm not clicking there, just focusing on the eyes and the parts that are a little bit more shadowy. Nothing major. I'm going to come in and bring this brush into her hair a little bit to restore some of the detail in her curls and her kinks. And yeah, it's just very subtle, but it makes a big difference. And I'd even go as far as to add another layer of that, mostly in her eyes. So again, her melanin, her beautiful chocolatiness is not compromised. You do not lose that detail. If anything, you just make it pop more. So this is a more even complexion that we have here. Of course, you still have like this shadow here that it doesn't do anything to distract you from the focal point. So I'm just going to leave it at that. It's up to you. That seems to be a mole. I'm going to leave it there. Beautiful beauty mark. And we're pretty much good with this one. So the last thing I would do is probably, again, bring in that texture just for this line that kind of separates the highlight from the shadow, just to make it a little bit softer. And then over here again, it's not necessary. She was perfect before. This is just the level of care and pickiness that I have when editing. And damn, look at this absolute stunning radiant beauty. Perfect. Now, This is going to be a perfect example of how one preset affects one partner or one person and not the other. So I'm going to run through here real quick and show you straight out of camera. With this one, I'm going with the Terrain. What did I use? Oh yeah, Terrain 6. And let's jump right in. We're doing profile corrections. Then I'm going to come in for to level out the photo a little bit. Bring this down. Here we have a very interesting situation where his leg and her leg are the leading lines. Same thing with the window here. The composition is incredible here. Their faces are in the very middle square here, so of the grid. So to me, it looks absolutely perfect. This leads you right into where the magic has happened or just happened, roar, if you know what I mean. Let's jump right in and notice while I hover over these again how all you see is teeth right now on this man, and that's not okay. You see the teeth and the highlight of his nose, and that is doing a complete disservice to him and his natural beauty, and we don't want that. So we don't need any heavy saturation. We're going to go with Terrain 6 because of its warmth. Or was it Terrain 3? Either one. I think the Terrain pack is really good for this one. So what we're going to do right off the bat is warm up the photo a little bit, enhance here, bring up the temperature, and notice how obviously there is an overall beige, warm, soft orange coloring to the photo. I'm going to come over here and lift the shadows right about there. And I'm going to tone down the saturation immediately. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the overall look of the photo. Now we're going to come in and individually work on these two lovely humans. So right here, the way his skin catches the light kind of gives it like a gray tint or like a gray look to it, like a dull look to his skin. But that's only because that tends to happen with melanated folks. And so the way we want to adjust this photo is to make sure that his skin is glowing and that these warm undertones you see here over by his chest over here, and his leg, we want to make sure all of that warmth is popping in the rest of his body where it seems to be a little bit dull. So we're going to bump this up. I think a 16 would, here's fine. And what we're going to do is just run this brush. Look immediately how much, like, what a difference it makes. I'm going to come over here to the nip. And then, so his tummy is all of a sudden just warmer all around. Come over here to his knees. And voila. It just restores some of the natural glow that should be there. And all right, now we're going to work on lifting the contrast and the shadows off his face. So now we're going to lift off some of the shadows and heavy contrast from her skin as well that comes with this preset. And let me see. It's going to be very subtle. She doesn't need much. It's just more so like on her chest area, here along the side of her face. And this is just to kind of restore her complexion as well, because she is drowned out in a lot of shadows here based on the light source. So she seems to be, they seem to be receiving light from behind and then also from the side over here. And I'm going to come in and soften the skin a little bit, again, just for an overall softness and diffusion of, where's the texture? Diffusion of the pores and all of that. Nothing too much, just very subtle. Her skin, absolutely gorgeous. Gonna bring that down to like a 28. Nothing much. I'm gonna come in and do one more layer right here. And again, she still retains all of her skin's natural features. We're just softening the landscape a little bit. Beautiful. And to me, this is a done deal. And yeah, let's move on to the next one. This is going to be a very simple edit. There is not much going on around her, so it's going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to go in with profile corrections, and again, based on my own personal preference, I'm going to come in and bring her eyes to this top line here, right here. It just feels more intimate, a little bit closer up, like we're actually like eye to eye, if that makes sense. So again, watch how a lot of these presets were made with people who are lighter skinned in mind. This does not work on her. Too much saturation, too much orange. She already has that natural orange glow in her melanin, so we don't need any extra of, we don't need to cake it on anymore with the preset. So let's go to Nomad 3. This is going to be the best bet because it still retains the natural warmth of her skin, if you can see the before and after. All we're going to work on right now, I'm going to leave the chest here the way it is. It's absolutely perfect. I just want you to notice that there is a bit of oversaturation in her makeup in this photo. She looks absolutely stunning. So all we're going to do is just soften up the saturation a little bit, maybe like a 8. Nothing too drastic. All we want to do is even out the complexion and overall tone of her face to match the rest of her body. So I'm gonna maybe bring it down here just a little bit. Nothing much. I think this looks pretty solid. Absolutely gorgeous. So I'm going to do it one last time over here just because I is who I is. And that's just how I roll. Perfect. So her texture looks absolutely, oh my god, she's stunning. So even though there is a highlight here because of where the light is hitting her, we are just going to come in underneath on her jawline to kind of correct a little bit of the shadow. And we're not lifting off any pigment. We're not lifting off anything else from her complexion. We're literally just going to come under here just to soften up the jaw a little bit. And I'm not going to touch her bronzer here because her cheekbones are popping. And that's the whole point of having bronzer there in that area anyway. So her makeup looks beautiful. Yeah, so this just softens it up. Obviously, if it would look too unrealistic if I went in to remove this shadow here. So I'm going to leave it. It looks perfect. This is, the light is coming from over here from this top left area. It hits her perfectly. It enhances her features in the right places. Her chest looks beautiful. And I think we're good with this one. I think that looks absolutely precious. So we're done with this one. Now, this is a great example of when it would be a good call to go for a black and white. So immediately you can see that there is a big range in their complexions. You can see the olive undertones of her skin here in her fingers. You can see that this model has discoloration between her chest and her hands, and it's a lot to work through individually. So unless you wanted to take the time to make sure, which is definitely possible, but for the sake of this video, if you want to just go ahead and make it a black and white for a classic, more solid look, cohesive look, you can do that. And this is what to look out for. So I'm just going to run through what I did here. I did the lens corrections. I went with preset 6 from G Presets from pack 3. And all I'm going to start doing now on these spot removals is working on these tiny little blemishes here and there, nothing major. So that's all that these are. So if you notice, I did also drop down the highlights. So when I applied the preset, it was here. I knocked down the highlights a bit, then I started the spot removals, nothing crazy. I added a few brush strokes to her face for texture. So notice what happens there on her skin, just a soft diffusion of the pores. Then I'm adding texture corrections here on her face, and I basically do some lifting of shadows here on her T-zone area, and I added grain because I love grain. I added a bit of a dehaze, and I lifted the exposure a bit. So here's a before and after. Absolutely stunning. And I actually just noticed the bra strap over here, so if you wanted to, I didn't even notice it the first time around, so it's up to you if you want to come in for a tighter crop. Like I said, I don't really give a shit too much about staying away from cropping out limbs. Me personally, it's up to you. And however you wanted to do it. I like her eyes here. I like that her face is along this line, and she's pretty close to this point here, so we could leave it right there. And another thing I want you to notice is her shoulder, what the texture adjustment did. It just diffused the pores. You can still see them, but it just, looks so gorgeous. And same thing over here, just very subtle. And the grain kind of helps to diffuse that too. A quick before and after of her face. And you can still see the differences in their complexion. You can still see that she tends to be a little bit, she's a little bit more brighter, and that they're more melanated here on the sides. So perfect to me. Now this one here is a stunning photo. This is the before and after, just for a reference. And I'm going to show you how, I think it might be easier. Let me see. I know the video is getting kind of long, but I'm going to show you, let me just show you which preset worked best here. G presets, right off the bat, this is upon import. This over here is the lens corrections. This is the preset with one click. Obviously the tones are very cool, and so this is going to be, this portion is going to be geared for people who like to shoot a lot warmer, or like to edit with warmer, moodier tones. So I bumped up the temperature, exposure, temperature, and saturation. Again, the holy trinity here when it comes to skin tones. And also luminance, I bumped it up a little bit. Notice here, notice her skin, how I bumped up the luminance just to brighten up some of the shadows that her face was catching. I lifted the shadows over here in this panel also. Oh, I feel like I'm about to sneeze. And then I removed some of the heavy contrast. When you first click this preset on, it gives you this much contrast, positive 34. So we're going to knock it down to 14. I'm bumping up the temperature, again, bringing the exposure down. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to zoom in on her face so you can see the brush strokes. I lifted, this is for contrast and shadow. So I'm lifting up some of the shadows. I'm doing some spot removals here for tiny little blemishes here and there, nothing major. She's absolutely glowing and radiant. Spot removals here. And I'm going to show you also on her hand. I did something over here to kind of warm it up. So it wouldn't look, let me see, where did I do it? I think, oh, here we go. So it's very subtle, but it just warms up and gives the hand a bit of a glow. And update the saturation. And we're pretty much done. There was just a few tiny tweaks, but it's just something to look into. Let me show you a before and after. Let me see, this is good. So there are some, you know, when you get up close, there are things to look into and to consider. One of the things here would be the blending of the highlight and the shadow. Make sure that it's a soft, smooth diffusion, and you can achieve that with the texture brush over here. And then to lift the shadows, again, shadow plus contrast. And yeah, this is what you get. So very beautiful, very effortless, glowing. And I also did run the texture brush along her chest here and her arm a little bit just for the pores, and she looks fucking gorgeous. So the photo, he still retains his complexion as well. She looks like she's glowing. And yeah, that's it for this one. This photo here is geared more toward the light and airy photographers. So I'm going to show you straight out of camera. The preset that I picked for this one is Terrain 4. And right away, look at how much her skin is blown out, how much detail we lose here. This is nothing against bright and airy photographers. This is just something to look out for overall, is that a lot of times when you are shooting or editing this way, you do lose a lot of the integrity of people's complexions. You lose a lot of detail. So one of the things that you can immediately, apart from like exposure, come into your Luminance tab over here, right there, and watch. I'm going to tone the luminance down right here. Luminance has gone down, and so it restores a lot of the detail, the texture, the landscape of this person. And yeah, we're going to work with the exposure and temperature here a bit, tone down the saturation, bring down the exposure a little bit. You kind of have to play around a little bit to find what works for you if you're going to keep it bright and airy. Again, the go-to would be exposure, temperature, and saturation, always. And sometimes luminance, as you saw in this case. We're going to, the spot removal was just over here in his face, tiny, tiny little details. I did bump up the tint here. I went from 0 to 10, and you can look at the photo for reference to see what that did. It just brought back a little bit of her undertones. It warmed up his skin a little bit. I'm going to bump up the temperature again and then crop the rectangle a little bit just to bring them in a little bit closer. And just for reference, you can see that I decided to put their faces in the very middle square here. Again, rule of thirds, I'm a sucker for that. So it's just something to keep in mind. So this one's good. Quick before and after. And you can see his face, his chocolatey skin looks absolutely perfect. You can see that he has more olive undertones in his face and his skin, and you can have that and show that and not lose, you know, not have it look dull or anything. This is the only photo that was mine, and I'm just going to give you a quick run through of what I did here on the left, just because this video is getting pretty long. So straight out of camera, this is what it looks like. It's not the most interesting photo composition-wise, but I do like it because you get to see the skin and her warm undertones here. So what I did is cropped it, added Terrain 3, and I immediately went to remove the lens correction, or to fix the lens corrections here. And the first thing I messed with was the green saturation and luminance. Let me show you that over here. Yeah, I prefer darker, deeper greens. Then I went and bumped up the temperature, bumped up the temperature again, brought down the exposure, and you guessed it, the saturation. I brought that down a little bit. Here's the Holy Trinity, the Holy Grail: saturation, exposure, and temperature. Once again, my go-to for everything. And I did bring down the yellow saturation a bit because I don't want the greens to look too pissy, if that makes sense. So notice the change here when I dropped down the saturation in the yellow. I did lift the profile amount here to 133 and see what that does to the photo. Not every preset that you buy is going to come with this profile, but this pack comes with it, and it makes it pretty easy to control some of the adjustments. It's kind of all built into here. Temperature, heat it up. Saturation, brought it down a touch, and then the luminance. Notice why I brought down the luminance. Because here she was looking a bit too bright and overexposed, and the luminance brought it back. See that? Before and after. And what it also does is, if you notice the rich warmth in her skin, it does not look dull. Her elbows look perfect. Her skin is glowing, and so here on this side of her body, it brings all the glow from this part of her arm throughout her skin. I hope that makes sense. She's glowing, basically. Whereas in the straight out of camera image, the skin here seemed to be a little bit more on the dull side, and with a bit of a grayer tint to it. And so here it's glowing and warmed up and perfect, in my opinion. Next one here, this is also going to be a quick run through. Do your lens corrections, of course. Nomad 6 is going to be the best bet for this one. I'll show you what, let's see if it works. Look at what the other presets do to his skin. Absolutely atrocious. And it's not just the preset's fault, it's just the way that the setting, the lighting was very, very warm, very orange. So it's something to keep in mind. You could always go for a black and white to, make it easier, but for the sake of this photo, if you absolutely have to stick to color, this is going to be a great way to learn how to adjust those orange tints. Saturations. So yeah, brought down the exposure, and I went to work on the orange, yellow saturation, and red as well. So I knocked them down here. You can see the amount. I knocked it down 37, 22, 19, and this is just a general idea. It's going to vary from photo to photo. Here I'm doing adjustments in his skin. All I did was, notice his forehead? All I did was soften the pores. That's it. That's what all of this is. I did adjust the exposure in his eyes. So look at his eyes here after. I just was restoring them to their former glory, see? And again, I worked on the saturation, exposure, keep sliding and playing with it. I added the graduated filter here on the sides. And so what you do is you find that here, you hit what you want, and I added dehaze. So that's what I did here. I did dehaze on both sides. Then I did the grain. Again, I'm a sucker for grain. And let me get rid of that. Here, I'll show you before and after the grain. Before grain, after. And I absolutely love that retro vibe. So that's that. This is this. This photo is going to also be a quick run through, just because I'm sure you know where to find all of these settings. I'm just going to walk you through what I did. This is upon import, remove chromatic aberration, the lens correction, and I'm going to lift those a bit and see how the side of her face starts. If you go too far, that's what you get. So we don't want to go that far, but maybe here. We're going to come in and work on her eye a little bit. Whoops. Temperature. Saturation a bit. Here we go. You kind of have to play it by ear and see what works. This was perfect right off the bat. I think this is I keep saying right off the bat. But what I mean is like immediately. That worked. That's perfect. So what I'm going to do is drop down the, let me see. We're pretty close to where I want it to be. Just going to bring down the exposure, warm it up a touch, because I want this photo to look the way it feels. And to me, it feels like grandma. It feels like warmth. You know, it feels like home. And I'm going to also, this is what I forgot, temperature, bring this down a little bit, only to counteract the yellow in her hair that wasn't there before. I mean, softly, but it, you know, the preset kind of enhanced it. So I'm just going to work this brush in here just a little bit to remove some of that yellow overcast look. And I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. If it were me taking the photo, I'd probably step back a little bit just to have her, you know, just to frame the photo a little bit better. But I think this, in terms of her complexion and her skin, it looks warm and rich. And I don't know, it just feels like grandma. I miss my grandma. I miss my grandparents. So this photo feels like comfort and home and warmth. One thing I did want to point out is that in the beginning, straight out of camera, her lips tend to have a slightly purplish like tone to them. So this preset did pretty good at, you know, making sure it didn't make it too purple. But one thing you can do is bump up the tint a little bit and kind of come in and work it in just to take it from purple to a little bit more of a pink, soft pink. It was very subtle. You almost can't even tell the difference. So anyway, that's that.